All right, my name is Lynn Peterson and I am Metro Council President for the Portland Metro Region, and thank you for being here today. I have worked my entire career from building and constructing roadways all the way up to working for transit agencies, representing 2 governors on transportation, and just being able to do a whole bunch of amazing things for a multimodal system in order to build complete communities. We have a great panel of elected officials and appointed people that are working hard on the modern version of Oregon's first transportation campaign. You remember what that was? It was get out of the mud. Yeah, in 1913, one of our first, well, was the first OTC commissioner, the first commission, took on the charge of Get Out of the Mud campaign, and that commissioner that took up the charge was Oswald West. And there you go, Oswald West. You knew him personally? No.
I like him.
He was a good guy. But what was interesting is that he actually promoted in that 1913 time frame and got legislation to make the beach a highway because the roads were so muddy along the coast. And so by 1919, they were able to pass the first transportation gas tax in the country. And I'm just going to read you a passage out of a book called Lifting Oregon Out of the Mud. In 1918, it took more than 5 hours to travel 16 miles along the coast due to the condition of the road, which was really a sea of mud. That is why the beach had become a highway. In 1919, the year that the nation's first state gasoline tax was 1 cent per gallon, it was enacted. And at the time, there were 83,332 cars registered, and 1 cent per gallon. We had a 2.5.
How much did gas cost then?
Yeah, I didn't look that up.
5 cents.
All right. But here's the deal, is that we've been always able to solve our own problems. While we have affected a lot of how we grow in the nation and best practices, we have amazing independence. And with population growth and affordable housing crisis, GHG emissions with climate change, and a racial equity issues in our urban areas and throughout the state, we need to take immediate action to be able to keep a high quality of life for all in the state. It also means that the transportation system needs, in terms of maintenance, are in big need in a big way because we have underinvested for so long. Well, we had a $5 billion transportation package that the state legislature adopted, and we should give them a round of applause. Here. We do have a culture in the state of maintenance first, which is really important because most states don't, but we have still underinvested over time, and we have a long way to go. But the transport needs of real people and real businesses have changed since 1919, and the impact of our transport modes have had negative impacts that must be mitigated. We need safe and affordable transport that does not isolate people in their own communities. Today we will take some time to talk about how we are all taking up this charge at the local level, at the state level, and the federal level to remove barriers that stop us from being able to invest in the type of transport system we need and want in the transition to a clean, safe transport system. I hope that you can take away an optimistic viewpoint as you walk out of this room at the end of the session, that we have that opportunity, that spirit of independence still alive, and that we have the ability to change the arc to be much better for the people today and the kids of the future, and lead, yet again, the nation. But before we get into our panel, we have a very special surprise guest that I will welcome up to. We've got two surprise guests. To talk about the work that he has continually done dogmatically at the federal level since being a Lane County Commissioner. He's worked solidly on federal transportation funding and policy for our state and nation, and continues to provide leadership with Oregon values for the rest of the region. Let me welcome up Congressman DeFazio.
Well, I also have a special guest too, a
outstanding new member of my committee, Sharice Davids from Kansas. Democrat from Kansas. You'll hear from Sharice tonight at the dinner, but she might say a little bit now. We're writing the first 21st century surface transportation bill. We've been living off the legacy of the Eisenhower era for more than 50 years. It's wearing out, and we've got to rebuild it, and we're going to rebuild it in a different way. We're going to rebuild it with new materials that are less, or even, there is even now carbon negative concrete has been invented. It's not quite ready for prime time yet, but we'll be there soon. So we have to rebuild it. We have to rebuild it in a way that's resilient, obviously for climate change. We're going to electrify the national highway network so that we can defossilize the movement of goods and people in this country. It's the largest single contributor to carbon emissions is transportation. And our committee covers all parts of this, maritime, aviation, surface transportation, transit. We're going to put a huge new emphasis and big increase in investment in transit. Our transit nationally has more than $100 billion backlog to just be brought up to a state of good repair. Why do people abandon transit? Not enough frequency and crappy material, crappy vehicles that break down. You don't want to get on something that breaks down. So we need to do that to get more and more people back. We need to build out new transit options for people. We're looking at exciting ways of getting people to transit. I just last week or 2 weeks ago, I was on something in Eugene called MGO, which is an electric vehicle, 6-passenger, that comes on demand throughout the city of Eugene, and it'll take people to transit stops or take them elsewhere, point to point. We're moving along with that. Someday those things might be automated. I've talked to people who think they will be. I think that's a little way in the future, and I'm in no hurry for that. Driving is, people who drive professionally are, a big part of our economy. And we're not going to put automated vehicles out there until they are really ready for prime time, and they aren't ready yet. But we're looking at things like flying cars, which aren't that far away. Drones to deliver packages, which will mean you don't have to run trucks way out into the country somewhere, electric drones. It's a very transformative, very, very exciting time, and I'm thrilled to be here. Lynn and I have worked together for years. In fact, I was just talking to staff yesterday. You got to talk to Lynn again about, practical design, appropriate solutions, cost-effective solutions that fit communities for our transportation problems. Sharice is a great member of the full committee and the subcommittee. You want to say a couple of words? Come on.
Well, I just right off the bat, I've already heard three things have been touched on that are very exciting to me: equity, multimodal transportation forms, and Back to the Future with flying cars. So
flying electric cars.
Flying electric cars. So the morning's already off to a really good start. So I am Sharice Davids. I represent the 3rd Congressional District in Kansas, and the only thing I want to say how amazing it has been, even in the short time that I've been in Congress, to be able to serve on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee with Chairman DeFazio. I consider him to be a mentor, and meeting people who share my enthusiasm about transportation is really cool. I consider myself to be a born-again transportation enthusiast because I got the chance to spend a year at the Department of Transportation under President Obama and over the transition into this current administration, and I learned a lot. And I am always out there preaching the good word of transportation and infrastructure investment. So I'm just really excited to be here and be able to hear about all the work that folks here are doing. So thank you so much.
All right, awesome. All right, I'm going to ask our panelists to come on up. We're having more of a much more informal type of setting than speechifying. We're going to ask a couple questions, then I can open it up to questions from the audience. So we've got, first we're going to kick it off with Commissioner Jessica Vega Peterson from Multnomah County. Round of applause. And not only a county commissioner, but former legislator and just all around good person on transportation, so thank you. And we've got Representative Karin Powers, who's been doing amazing work, not just in transportation over the years, but also with the cap and trade carbon investment. So thank you for doing that. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then the OTC Commissioner Extraordinaire, Alando Simpson. So we're going to kick it off with a quick question to Commissioner Peterson. And I just want to say thank you so much. We have created a task force in the Portland metro region of 34, it's a small committee, of 34 people to look at going to the ballot in November of 2020 with the first ever regional transportation bond measure. And you are co-leading that. And I think the question to you is, based on your Multnomah County experience, which has limited assets in transportation, but a very important one in the Burnside Bridge and the resilience of our region as we move forward, but also in what you're hearing from folks, what are the biggest challenges that you're hearing as you walk through this very long process? And what are some of the potential solutions?
Okay. So thank you. Thank you, Lynn, and thank you. It was great to have Congressman DeFazio and our special guest here today. Thank you for sharing this. I think transportation is one of those issues that, you know, people are like, why transportation? It's so boring. But I actually think it is so interesting and so complex. And just like a budget, transportation is one of those issues where it actually, the decisions we make about transportation shows a lot about the values we have and how we value community, and how we're going to prioritize things. And so to answer your question, Lynn, I think that there are three things that I would say would be like the biggest challenges. The first one is that there is a recognition among the advisory committee members that in the past in Oregon, transportation projects have really bulldozed communities of color and actually destroyed communities, especially within the Portland area. And we are having serious conversations about how we can really center communities who have been impacted negatively with transportation decisions in the past, and really look at and center racial equity as a part of the decision making that we're doing with these projects. And I really want to appreciate how the council, Metro Council, has put together this advisory committee, because it's about 1/3 elected officials, 1/3 business people, and 1/3 members of the community. And so we have a broad representation throughout the entire metro region with different voices and different perspectives at the table. So we're having some really interesting conversations. So in addition to, you know, really how do we make sure that this transportation measure is actually lifting up communities that in the past have been destroyed, we're also talking about transportation in a way that probably hasn't been done in past transportation measures in the state before, maybe with the exception of the legislative package that happened. I think that, you know, it's not just about fighting congestion and how do we deal with congestion, or how do we get goods to market in a way that helps our economy in the region. I mean, those are traditional transportation questions that have been asked. Those are part of our discussion today, but we're also really concerned about how do we make sure that equity is a component of the work we're doing, that safety is a component of the work that we're doing, that climate impacts are a part of the work that we're doing and the measure that we're putting together. So it's a more complex discussion that we're having on how we make these investments and how do we really put together a package that really builds the transportation system of the future that people want to see and that we need voters to get behind and support. And then I think the last really issue that we have in our discussions that's a really meaty issue is the fact that the funding sources for transportation projects have traditionally been things like gas tax. However, in Oregon, because of the Highway Trust Fund, those gas tax dollars can only go towards really like infrastructure improvements like roads and right-of-ways and culverts and things like that. But when we talk about transportation today, we are talking about need for transit expansion and operations costs. We're talking about multimodal and active transportation. We're talking about racial equity and community building components that aren't covered by that. So the funding mechanism is going to be a really interesting conversation that we're going to get into. So for those three things, some of the path forwards, that was the second part of your question. That's the harder thing to answer. But I think the way that we are going about it with engaging the community, both at the advisory committee table, with the local improvement teams that have been set up over the summer in each county to talk about the projects, and really the good dialogue that we're having with the public is going to help us move forward on those things and really let us be smart and visionary about how we're making the investments in transportation, because I think with all of the complications that I talked about, there is a huge desire at the advisory committee level to build something visionary and to build something that really is making that kind of future investment that people want to see that reflects our values.
Thank you. So, Representative Powers. We have in the region, as Commissioner Peterson just said, Vega Peterson, sorry. I always forget the Vega because I'm a Peterson.
Yes.
And then I stop and I'm like, there's something wrong. So, yes, thank you. Representative Powers, what we've done is basically, instead of going to a 30-year project list, 30-year-old project list, which every single one of your communities has, it's just a project list that's been developed over many, many years that never actually received any funding. So we have projects in there that are no longer really either necessary or reflect the values of the communities today, or even envisioned things that we've been talking about, like flying cars or autonomous vehicles or Lime scooters, right? So thank you for pushing forward on trying to figure out how to help the state, let alone the region, and all of the urban areas figure out how to move into the future. And as co-chair of the Joint Committee on Carbon Reduction last session, and now as chair of the House Committee on Energy and Environment, you've been a champion to pass a comprehensive legislation to reduce GHG emissions and mitigate climate disruption. How do you address the tension between the need to invest in our transportation system to deal with growth and the needs of the economy, and at the same time the need to dramatically reduce transportation-related GHG emissions, which represent 40% of the total GHG emissions? Small question.
Super easy. So I backed into my climate work because I believe housing justice is transportation justice, is climate justice. And when the first spur of the Max line expanded into my neighborhood in Milwaukee, we saw rental prices double and now triple. So we've pushed people further out of our metropolitan areas because of the skyrocketing cost of housing, and then we wonder why the Portland metro area is struggling to meet its greenhouse gas reduction goals, and we have a housing and transportation issue. So I think fundamentally incrementalism is not where we need to be in the next 5 years. We have to think big, dream big, and then make it happen big financially. It's the way that we're going to be able to meet the 10-year out reduction goals that IPCC report has told us we need to meet if we're going to curb the worst effects of climate change. Now, I say that knowing that many of you probably followed our efforts to pass the second most comprehensive climate bill in the country this past session, only to see it die on the Senate floor before it could come up for the vote because the Republicans walked out of the state. The cost of transportation and the through line that places on everything, and the fear of an increased cost of transportation because we can't see what kind of region, what kind of state, what kind of nation we could become with massive public investment, is what held people back. I know there's a price sensitivity around gas prices increases and others, but you know, getting stuck in traffic doesn't just cost you gas dollars. It costs you lost time with your kids, your family, your loved ones. It costs you less time at work. It costs you more in the cost of goods and delaying services. So I think the antiquated model that we've adopted, I think, in funding our transportation systems is not going to match what we need to go to moving ahead. But it's what we have now. So we need to place goals on where we want to be and then kind of back in the work collectively together in our communities to build out the systems that will reflect our local unique needs. And especially in Oregon, that's going to look different. What we need out here in Bend is not what we need in Portland, and we're going to be at different stages along the way. What we need out in rural Oregon is not going to be what we need in Portland. So a lot of this is going to be driven by local community input. Resilience, I think, is where we need to get to. Oregon's not going to solve any of these issues on its own. We are a relatively small player, but we do have big vision. That has been our thing as a state. We have one of the most progressive land use systems in the world, and we have continued to back that up when it gets pushed back on or people try to undermine it year after year, decade after decade. So we spend a lot of time and effort building out little pieces of our transportation system and tackling electrification in a little bit here. The private market is already going there. I think that's what we learned working through our climate bill. Daimler trucks are deploying electric long-range vehicles already and are testing them elsewhere. There are renewable diesel, 100% renewable diesel alternatives. We just need a market. We as public leaders need to stop being so, I think, cautious about talking about the trade-offs in cost and step forward and say, this is where we need to go, this is where we're going to go. Private market, we need you to be a partner in doing this with us and work with us rather than against us. It'll make Oregon an actual leader in a clean energy revolution and will help to prepare us for the influx of people moving here because our climate is so stable compared to other locations. So I think I sort of got at your answer a little bit. It's going to be really hard and really important that we do it anyway, would be my upshot.
I like that. So moving on to Commissioner Simpson. Thank you for all of your leadership over the last several years. You've been on for 6 years as a commissioner now? 5 years. And have seen a lot of actual changes, not only in the state, just at large, but also on the commission, policy-wise. So you've served and have been building towards those changes, and you're about, I think, at a point where you can actually move from being move into the space that our Congressman Earl Blumenauer envisioned when, as a young legislator, he changed the name from the Highways Department to the Department of Transportation. But because our state transportation departments were set up to actually move people through states to other states, thus the interstate system, they were set up to build very high-speed projects that prioritize certain trips over other trips. And I think what you're growing into the space of how does the state start to help the urban areas actually achieve their goals while still moving people and freight. And so you want to talk a little bit about where you see the policy changes coming and some of the opportunities for partnership?
Okay, so I don't know how in-depth I can get about policy related work, but what I can do is elaborate on at least a uniform vision, I guess, that's been developed and discussed over and over amongst leadership at the department. But one thing I want to make very clear to everybody is that in order for us to do anything related to our future, which is investment, which all comes back to what's coming out of my pocket, that's what this is all about. It's about money. What's coming out of my pocket, what am I getting for it? The number one thing that we have to do, first and foremost, is restore trust in government. If there's no trust in government, we're just running into the wall over and over and over again, using the same talking points, doing the same messaging strategies, we have to come at this from a way different landscape, way different perspective, way different innovative model, way different tone, has to be different leaders. They have to look different. I mean, the whole landscape it's going to be transformational shift. For anything to move forward, it's going to be something very uncomfortable for everybody to be able to adopt and absorb and accept going forward. If we're actually talking about progressive change for the 21st century, it will not be the way we've always done it. And it's going to make a lot of people uncomfortable. The second thing is, as it relates to the metro region, and not even just the metro region, but all MPOs around our state, is that we should probably start planning for populations to double, as opposed to as what Karin was just mentioning. These piecemeal kind of projects and concepts. If we talk about, we'll just use Portland metro region for example. If we just talk about preparing for a region that has 5 million people. What do we want the region to look like, and how do we want people to be able, how are people going to be able to benefit and see that their quality of life has shifted with 5 million people living in that particular, area. And so those are the main steps. And obviously transportation is just one piece to this. At ODOT, for the policy piece, for me personally, I feel like it's really indicative that we work closely with the county, the city, metro, because they're on the ground in the regions, and they're going to be developing the local policies and initiatives and strategies and goals around how you actually create transit-oriented development strategies that enable people to get from point A to point B without having to depend on single occupancy vehicles, while using a transit system that is connecting community to community without suppressing people, oppressing people, or gentrifying people out of the community, so there can be a shared ecosystem and everybody can benefit off that quality of life. But those are the steps. So from a policy side at the department, it's really, there's just a whiteboard right now. And I think the beauty in this is that what we learned yesterday, because a lot of the reason why I'm even down here is because I had a commission meeting yesterday, is that it makes some people in the department very uncomfortable. And just as I mentioned, there's a lot of people in all different walks of life across our state that are going to be very uncomfortable about the change that we have to go through. Otherwise, it's just a waste of time. And we could just save everybody's time and just stop talking bullshit. If we want to get straight to the point, we have to address where we're vulnerable, where we're exposed at, where we're weak at, and start figuring out how do we get better at it. And quite frankly, I believe that
Based on your statement, you can wear that hat.
Oh. Sorry, I used
Stuff
that
done.
Okay, I got it. Trying to figure this one out again. But I think we're just at a very important piece right now, a place in our ecosystem, and I think in order for us to grow, we're going to have to get out of our own way. It's going to really require uniform, comprehensive policy development. It's not going to be one agency having this policy and then having that policy. It's going to be, hey, what policies do we all need to collectively work on together that are going to enable us to get to the future that we're aspiring to get to and really become a global leader in the 21st century, right? How to create a truly sustainable ecosystem. We cannot learn from any other city, any other country, any other town, any other region. It's all right here in front of us. We just have to get out of our own way, and we have to be innovative, and we have to be able to be take risk, and we have to be bold. And I think the beauty in I think the beauty in Lynn being president of the Metro region is that she's not afraid. And I think the beauty of that is that for political leaders, it's going to require some bullshit, and you're going to have to be willing to lose. Your decisions can't always be predicated on winning. Because if you do that, you'll find yourself in a very you'll find yourself in a very volatile situation for the future. And so I'm definitely inspired by her leadership efforts and the fact that she is being bold and thinking outside the box and willing to take risks, because that's the way in which we have to move forward for the future. Because it's not about us, it's about a generation that doesn't even exist yet.
No. So let us know if you can't hear us. I do play trombone. I can project to the back of the room. I think the last question that I'll ask these folks to just kind of talk about, and we don't talk about it enough, with the way our Constitution dedicates road money, right? Gas tax, vehicle registration fees. We are missing a huge component of the transport system, and that is the land use. Because we don't do transportation for transportation's sake. We do transport projects and programs to move people and goods between land uses. And either you're benefiting a land use or you're hurting a land use. Either you're actually isolating a person who can't get to the bus stop because they can't cross the street, or it takes too long on that bus, right? Or you are providing a windfall by providing an interchange to land owners. We are not actually talking about those windfalls and the cost to society of who gains and who loses in terms of access.
And Representative Powers is spot on. Between 2015 and 2017, congestion rose by 23% in the Portland metropolitan region. And when we poll everybody, it was 5 years ago. They all point to 5 years ago. That's when things no longer looked and felt like Portland. And the reason for that was not just because we had new people moving in, it's because we have so many people that can't afford to live. And now they're spending more time forced to drive, but they're forced to drive much longer distances. Because they're forced to drive longer distances, they're on the road much longer, which means that we have not just more people, we have more demand at the same time for longer periods of time. So whether you're Miles Fiberglass Company in Clackamas County, paying people gas money just to attract them to work because we have a labor shortage, or whether you're Washington County, Hillsborough Airport folks, they've got skilled mechanic jobs at $25 an hour and no place for those folks to actually live at $25 an hour anywhere near the Hillsborough Airport. So they're commuting in from Stubbs State Park. They're living in the park. So we have massive issues all around our metropolitan areas, all the way up and down the West Coast. And I know that all three of these folks are actually very passionate about this connection to affordable housing and affordable transit. So if we just want to end, why don't we just end with kind of your number one thought going forward of how each of you have worked on this issue to bring affordable housing, but more specifically affordable housing and transport together. Whether it's just raising the issue, whether it's a proposed bill, or whether it's this package.
So I'll give an example of the 2019 session. When it was clear that we were not going to be able to get our climate action program over the finish line, I pivoted and started talking to all my colleagues about how our efforts to unlock current housing in House Bill 2001, very, very controversial, but just allowed cities to be able to upzone. And it eliminated single family zoning, but I explained to people, it's not like you're going to see condos moving in next door. It's essentially moving to a form-based code instead of a site-by-site based code that does pick winners and losers based on housing type. You can still set roof limits and others and neighborhood character comparability limits. It just says there's different types of stuff that can go in here that reflect more both our aging communities that need more walkable housing. The number of people moving into Milwaukee who are downsizing and the surrounding areas are selling large houses because their kids have moved on, and they are competing with first-time home buyers. We need more housing that fits people who are at different points in their lives who all want to live in the city centers. I think that would be the first one. The second thing I would say would be we need to look at what types of transit serve different communities and also be willing to go to bat for ones that are less sexy but are just as important. The people I see taking the Max line the first couple days when it started running in Milwaukee were people I never saw on the bus. That's great, but that also means people who used to take all the bus all the time might not see themselves in the new systems of public transportation that we had set up in a region, or it might not work for them anymore. There is a massive need for bus rapid transit, and that is something we could fund with our current highway fund constitutional dollars. If we partner with local jurisdictions, we have some flexibility. We need to bump up against the edge of that flexibility together in the near term as we figure out how to fund these things in the long term.
All right, great. Hopefully I don't break it this time. But I think I had mentioned it earlier, it's TOD, transit-oriented development is really how we solve our issues in the future as it relates to housing and transportation. But aside from that, there is this challenge that we have around everyone trying to live close in the central city and obviously share that whole quality of life and that vibrancy and everything. But personally, to be candid about it, I believe that we should be looking at building a second downtown as opposed to just trying to force everybody into one area, because market forces are going to dictate what happens in central city. And I'm only referring to Portland, so just to be clear. But downtown Portland, the market forces are going to dictate what happens there, period. It's just, you're not gonna, it's just too far gone at this point. And I could be totally wrong, but I try to be practical as much as I can, and it doesn't seem logical based on land values. You can make that work unless you start building 60-story towers, you know. So with that, we have this great footprint of land in East Portland that's blighted, underdeveloped, underinvested in, undersupported, that we could have a very strong, aggressive economic development strategy with a Columbia corridor that's industrially zoned, with mixed-use zoning, with massive infrastructure opportunities around multimodal transportation. Like, we could be thinking about a whole new city, a whole new community, and do it in a truly sustainable fashion. And I think that's, if we focus our attention on the future as opposed to trying to fix things that are already broken, or not, maybe not broken, but just hard to fix. Yeah, at capacity. Wow, see, engineers. But I just think, I think if we collectively as a community start thinking about how we start building a second portion of our city, so we can start, you know, having real comprehensive development strategies around it, and then connect the communities through transit. I think that's how we can be successful in the future around housing and transportation.
So look, Alando's also an East Portland resident like me, so we have a lot of love for East Portland, and really see every single day the potential that's out there, and the way that more investment, more focus on the area can really, you know, address some of the issues that we're struggling with. So to go back to the question of, you know, how do we address this housing issue with the work that we're doing in transportation, one of the first couple meetings that we had with the Transportation Advisory Committee was talking about the values that we're bringing to the work. And one of the things that came up again and again and again that we heard from people was, people want to make sure that all of the investments that we have just made, that the voters have just supported from the Portland Housing Bond and the Metro Housing Bond, are going to be leveraged in a way, that those housing investments are going to be leveraged in a way that that goes with the investments that we're planning to make with this transportation bond. We want to make sure that as we're investing in corridors to help buses move better through downtown areas, that are making streets safer for people who live there, that we're also building housing around those investments so that we can take advantage of that, and that the housing that we're making is affordable housing, so that we don't run into the issue that Karin was talking about earlier, where you see rents double and triple after the infrastructure investments are made. So there's a really deep desire to see that, and I think it's also, you know, from the people who are on the committee, but I also think it's what we owe to the taxpayers and the voters in Metro and Portland and around the region, who have made these investments in housing, and who we hope will make these investments in transportation, so that we are leveraging the money to the best way possible to help build the type of region that people want to see, that is livable for everybody in our system, and not just the people who are downtown, who are living close. The other thing I think of when it's housing and transportation, and how do we address the fact that people are getting pushed out further and further. And you look at how our transportation impacts on carbon emissions. The bend of it is actually, you know, down over several years, and then it goes down very far during the last recession that we just had, because people didn't have enough money maybe to drive their car. Gas was too expensive, so they were actually going to transit voluntarily, or they were going to a community college by their house because they lost their job that they were transporting to. So we know that we can reduce the demand for transportation if we're building community centers where people have access to their jobs, have access to stores, have access to parks and schools and recreation that is around where they're living. And that's part of the larger economic development vision that we need to have for our region, so that we can actually be addressing the challenges of climate impacts for transportation by helping people not have to go quite so far to get to the things they need, and that's building more equitable communities across our region. So,
All right, if you have any questions for this wonderful panel, now would be the time to ask them, and I'm going to limit it to 5, because I think we have time for about 5, just so you know, and we'll start with the man who put his hand up first. In the front, yeah.
Thank you.
You want to stand up and?
No, no, no.
Yeah.
First of all, I want to comment that the Commissioner, I think it's true that ODOT has a bit of a perception of being a bit of an autopilot based on an old paradigm, and his comments that paradigm needs to shift, I think are very well timed. My question is, what is going to be the impact or the connection between the metro area transportation bond issue and Connect Oregon?
So the question is, how is the Connect Oregon $5 billion connected to the region's initiative? And should I just?
No, he said Connect. You talking about Connect Oregon or House Bill 17?
Well, there's Connect Oregon, there's House Bill 17,
Okay, so
and then there's the metro. I guess I should throw.
How is all connected between?
He was just saying the lottery bond program, Connect Oregon, right?
Yeah.
You're referring to the lottery bond program.
Right, but include the other one as
State,
well.
how are we coordinating?
How are you coordinating?
I think well, the problem is right now we've gone through massive shifts, that paradigm shift, right? And trust me, that does not come easy, and there's going to be still warfare in the process. But the key is that now that we've just onboarded and we're still waiting on Senate approval of Chris Strickler, our new director, who I'm very excited about, very inspired, and just humbled to be around him. He is somebody who is adamant about at the tip of the spear, diversity, equity, inclusion, greenhouse gas emissions, and sustainable revenue streams, which alternative, innovative sustainable revenue streams. But how we cross-integrate with Metro it's going to be a step-by-step process, and I think it's something I'm excited to see how it plays itself out.
Let me get just a little bit more detailed. When we set out the task force direction, we said that the state and federal role was to the interstate system. So a lot of HB 2017 went towards proposed interstate projects. We are only looking at whether the region can help make the connections across I-5 better for bike ped transit and even safety for vehicular movement if it's necessary. That's our role. So when the Rose Quarter project moves forward, there is a proposal to put auxiliary lanes in and then a lid on top. And if there is a necessity to make that whole vision happen, then the region would consider putting money into that portion of the project as an add, but we wouldn't be the main funder of it, right? So just to break it down though, why $5 billion sounds like a lot, but it really isn't. $5 billion cut in half of it was for maintenance, because we have a backlog of maintenance and preservation. So now you're down to $2.5 billion. $2.5 billion statewide. We got less than $1 billion in total funding for the region, and it went to Powell.
We still need more.
And we still need more, but it went to Powell Boulevard, right? Mm-hmm. I-205 proposal to initiate it, but not to fund and construct it, and 217, and then Rose Quarter. Yeah. So it's a good start, but the majority of the trips in any major metropolitan area, any small to medium, are not on the interstate. They're not on the interstate. They are on the arterials that are also state-owned on 82nd Avenue. They are on McLaughlin Boulevard. They are on Barber. They are on TV Highway. I mean, we can keep going. They're state-owned roadways that were state 2-lane farm-to-market roads that are now acting as our arterials, and that's where we literally kill the most people, because they're set up for high-speed design in a very high-dense environment, and people are running out to catch a bus mid-block because it's a half mile to the next signal, and it's a very long crossing. So this is what this measure is really aimed at dealing with, is growing into an urban region and making the investments so that people are actually moving safely and goods are moving efficiently. Good question. We're gonna go over Catherine, right?
Yeah, Catherine Thompson. I'm the Secretary of the Environmental Caucus, and petrified about climate change. So tell me kind of maybe from Metro's perspective and also the city's perspective in terms of pollution and climate pollution, why we're still buying diesel investments and not paying more for electrification, in our systems that we need for buses and
You wanna take this one in terms of what's being proposed in the package?
Okay, so that is a great question. So because the issue of climate and how we can electrify our system is a really big one. So I'm actually at the county, not the city, but we all are looking at our regional issues. So I'm going to focus on one point of that. So just this past week on Tuesday for the Multnomah County Board, we actually had a updated briefing on a resolution that we passed 2 years ago, which was the 100 by 50, which says that by 2050 we're going to have 100% renewable energy for Multnomah County. We passed that 2 years ago in partnership with the city, so they also passed this almost the exact same resolution, making the same commitment. And our briefing was 2 years later, what progress have we made? What's been happening so far? How are we actually going to achieve this? Because I'm really proud to say, and I have my my colleague, Commissioner Lori Stegman, is in the room. I know that for all of us, we don't want to just make this like, really yay, happy goal, and then not actually see it happen. We're all committed to making that happen. And so the conversations that we're having is, one, how can we internally as governments make sure that we are purchasing vehicles, that we are incenting things for our employees to be able to make these better choices. And then talking about the broader policies that we have impact on as elected officials, as government bodies. So one, a huge thing is how do we, as we build new commercial and residential properties, not have carbon-based fuel sources in there, which, in a lot of ways is natural gas, right? So is that something that we want to disallow, like they've done in Berkeley and some other jurisdictions, right? The other thing is the transportation sector, because as it's been said, transportation is the #1 greenhouse gas source, both in our country and in our state. And the electrification of our transportation system, along with some other renewable energy possibilities, is one of the biggest ways that we can make change. So we're talking about our own fleets internally, but it's also partnering with TriMet and really pushing TriMet to make investment in electric buses or alternative fuel buses, and not continue to buy diesel buses, which have a 16-year lifespan and would continue to, to pollute in a ways that we don't want it to. I will say that one thing that I've noticed in the Portland area is that there is a pushback, I think, from some communities about the idea of electric vehicles for single occupancy vehicles, because there's a big push to get people onto transit and to really invest and develop our transit system, which I am 100% in favor of that goal. But we also know that not everybody is going to get in transit, and a lot of the really big push and pull that people have, for instance, about highway widening and all of these discussions that come up, are doing that with the assumption that all the cars are going to be gas-burning vehicles. And I think that we have to be fighting on all fronts when it comes to climate, and that includes trying to build electric vehicle charging networks across our state and region, and helping to get people into electric vehicles, even for their own single occupancy vehicles, so that we cut down on the emissions for people who are continuing to drive that. So that's the work that we're doing locally on that, and it is something that we continue to talk about all the time because we know it's a big issue.
Okay. Up in here front, Don.
There's a lot of talk about urbanization, and I guess this is both a suggestion and a question. I think transportation and regional development really do a pretty good job for a lot of people with disabilities, people in wheelchairs and things like that. It's surprising to me that the same amount of care and thought does not go into people who are blind or have various other visual type disabilities, and that's a much larger group of people than just blind people, maybe 5 to 10%. What I'm talking about is designing things that are easier to walk, so that you don't have to actually see to get around a cafe or something like that. And there's a long list. There are architects who specialize in this sort of thing, and what you end up with is a city that actually is a lot more friendly to people, not just blind people, but everybody. It's almost inevitable. Another example is the information, the kiosks, etc. Most of the information available to me when I want to use public transportation is not accessible, especially the maps. And it doesn't have to be that way, but it is going to be that way if accessibility is glued on instead of planned from the very beginning. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. A round of applause for that. Bringing up that good point. From the standpoint of design, we're talking about policies and funding mechanisms, and a lot of what Commissioner Simpson is going to be working on with OTC has been in the development stage, but this is what causes me to have optimism, is that the Oregon Transportation Commission will be adopting urban design standards. What we have been assuming for the entirety of, since 1956, is that we're designing for speed of a vehicle. And when you design for speed of a vehicle, everything else has less import. And it also makes everything very, very expensive for very few trips. And it's really not safe for everybody. So what we've done is created a system that's not accommodating to all modes, and it gets down into the deep, dirty detail of the design and whether you're actually walking your project. And when I was doing training for Hawaii DOT, which, yeah, that was a really rough training. It was awesome. I'd go back anytime. The deputy director, we had taken 125 design engineers out into the field to look at the proposed light rail station in Honolulu, and we made them all walk the neighborhood and ask them questions as we went. And the next morning, the deputy director came in and said, I need before we kick off the training, I need to tell you something because I've made a grave mistake. I'm like, oh God. He said, when I came back into Hawaii DOT after being gone into the private sector, I was horrified that all of our design engineers were using Google Maps to do their design. So I told you all to go out and get in your car and at least visit the site. And what I should have told you is you need to walk the site, you need to walk the neighborhood, you need to bike the neighborhood, you need to get on the transit line and see how people are accessing it. And the last thing you should be doing is driving it. But you should drive it. But it was an epiphany for the 125 people that did that walking, and it's so important. And even my nephew from Minnesota, who was visiting in Lake Oswego with me, pushed the signal to get the audio cue, and it says, wait. He said, your audio signal isn't as nice as ours in Minneapolis. So it really is in the design details of even down to how nice are your audio recordings. It does make my dog sit though. One more question up here.
So I don't live in the metro area.
Yeah.
And I recognize that all of you do and are focused on the metro area.
Yeah.
Your traffic in the metro area impacts my life horribly.
And what area do you live in?
I live in Salem.
Salem.
And I have to go to Portland to meetings, and it's dreadful. Also in Salem, we have a bus system that runs so infrequently that it's not a viable means of transportation, and it runs so infrequently because people don't use it, and people don't use it because it runs so. I mean, it's like, and I don't know if it's really a question. I just would implore you all to think as you're looking at your jurisdictions that your jurisdictions connect to mine.
Right.
And we need that kind of thinking. I drive up and down I-5 and I think, please just get this big space on I-5 and space in the middle. Can you put light rail down it? For me, please. That would help us so much.
Yes.
I had to work in Woodburn the other day to make an hour and 40 minutes to go 17 miles to get to work, which isn't really great for me and my patients.
So, well, and I think that's an outgrowth. Thank you. I think this whole issue is actually an outgrowth. It's a problem in Canby. It's a problem in St. Helens. It's a problem in Cascade Locks now.
Yeah.
Hillsborough, right. And I think I'm just gonna kind of summarize probably on behalf of all of us. There are two ways to deal with just mitigating congestion because you can't solve it, right? And one of them is demand management, which means you're either pricing or producing other transport modes, or you're building more capacity for the very thing that we've all said that we want to get away from. And so I think what we're trying to do as a group, which is what gets to Commissioner Simpson's overlapping values and overlapping policies, is that we're all headed in the same direction, that this region is not going to be looking at pushing in the direction that we don't want to go in anymore, but actually morphing and saying, okay, how do we do demand management? What are the other options that we can afford to? How do we talk to Cascade Locks about more transit? How do we talk to St. Helens or North Plains about other transit? Because we are not going to be able to accommodate their growth as the region becomes less affordable, which is why Salem has seen increases as well, right? Anything else to add? I just want to say thank you for all the transit investment in the state, because that was a first good step in that direction. And thank you for all the transit-related policies from the OTC, which has been helping move people more safely. And thank you for making sure that there is a keen eye on making sure that the entire region steps up. Thank you, Commissioner Vega Peterson, on making sure that we're all holding ourselves to a higher standard. And with that, a round of applause to our panel.